Welcome to Art Bell Somewhere in Time. Tonight featuring Coast to Coast AM from June 24th, 1994.
From the high desert and the great American Southwest, I bid you good evening and good morning. Under a slightly declining but still very full moon and a Friday night, Saturday morning kind of situation, this is Coast to Coast AM PM. On what's almost the weekend. Hi, everybody. I'm Art Bell. Well, there is a lot of news to talk about, and we're going to get to that this morning. We're going to get to Open Line Talk Radio. The O.J. situation continues, bombshell after bombshell by the day, and today is no exception. They've blown the grand jury right out of the water, and we'll talk about that. The president taking on conservative talk show hosts, specifically Rush Limbaugh, and I'm sure many others, probably this one included. We'll talk about that. The economy, the dollar's in big trouble. We'll talk about that. The U.S. Supreme Court rules on private property. We'll definitely talk about that. The Clinton week. Oh, it was a bad week for the president. And we'll talk about that one, too. A lot more. I've got a lot of news. But I have promised you a guest this evening, this morning, and I am going to carry through with that. There is a new book out entitled The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. And this is somebody, surely I would have normally scheduled for Dreamland, but because of the timeline, Kevin Randle, co-author with Donald Schmidt. Kevin Randle is going to have, and Donald Schmidt are going to have some sort of expo or some sort of get-together up in the northwest part of the country, I believe up in the Portland area or perhaps in Washington. And so because of that time line, we decided to go ahead and have him on this evening. You all know about Roswell, don't you? On the back of the book it says, this is the extraordinary true story of the crash of an alien spacecraft with a crew of 5 near Roswell, New Mexico, and the great lengths federal agencies went to keep the news from becoming public. By the way, this is soon to be a movie on Showtime. The Chicago Sun-Times said the government covered up the crash for security reasons, and the cover-up continues to prevent panic. Panic! Chester W. Little, these brilliant science writers have demonstrated the validity of this UFO crash. He is the Manhattan Project inventor, the first atomic detonator. Dr. Richard Haynes, NASA research scientist, said, Randle and Schmidt's explosive and important book has set an extraordinary high standard of investigative scholarship. So, in other words, here are people who have looked into this closely and find apparently there to be a case, a strong case, that yes, it really happened. By most UFO scholars, this incident is considered to be the most authentic, well-documented case of a visit to Earth by aliens. Not so intentional, perhaps. So, off we go to, I think, Portland, Oregon. Kevin Randle, welcome to the program. Well, hold on there. Let's put you over here and say, now, Kevin Randle, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I think I'm actually in Vancouver.
Are you in Vancouver?
I'm across the river from Portland.
Okay.
So I'm close.
Oh, close enough.
You're right.
All right, Kevin. First of all, glad to have you on the program, and I have long had a great amount of curiosity about Roswell. I'm curious about yours. How did you come to be interested in Roswell?
I think I have to blame my partner, Don Schmidt, for that. He's the Director of Special Investigations for the G. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies. And in the late 80s, the center determined there was a lot of work still to be done on Roswell. Witnesses that needed to be interviewed. People needed to be found.
Right.
And he wanted to bring someone on board who had a military background. I had spent 4 years in the Army as a helicopter pilot and then 12 years in the Air Force, both in active duty and the active reserve as an intelligence officer. And he thought that the military background would help me understand the mindset of the people we would be interviewing. So in 1989, we began our search to find out what happened at Roswell, thinking that we would go into the town, spend 3 or 4 days there, find the prosaic answer, and then blow out of town with an answer, and everybody would be happy. Just didn't work that way.
I'm sure it didn't. So how did it work? I mean, you went to Roswell, and what? What did you find? What were you expecting to find?
I thought that we would, in a lot of the early UFO cases, if you go back to the primary sources, you can find a pretty interesting answer. You can find something that makes sense that doesn't necessitate a belief in extraterrestrial spacecraft. And we thought we would be able to do that, find a secret project, something like that would explain the case. But it didn't happen that way. We began talking to the witnesses, such as Bill Brazel Jr., the son of the man who discovered the debris field. And we sat with him for an hour and a half and listened to what he had to say and discovered that he was telling the truth as he knew it, and there was not a prosaic explanation. And we expanded the search out from there, finding more witnesses, additional witnesses, people who clearly were in Roswell in 1947, the Provost Marshal, for example, the 509th Bomb Group, Provost Marshal being akin to the Chief of Police, telling us that the craft was extraterrestrial. I mean, that's what he told me personally. It was extraterrestrial. And they were giving us first-hand testimony as opposed to the second and third-hand stories we'd had in the past. So it became very, very interesting.
Well, suppose I play like the government, Kevin, and I say, no, these are all very fanciful, very interesting stories, but look, it was a balloon. We examined the pieces, and it was a balloon.
The problem with that story is that the Air Force offered that, or the Army actually at the time offered that explanation almost immediately. But we found the Chief of Staff of the 8th Air Force, General Thomas Dubose. He said, no, the balloon explanation was designed specifically to get the reporters off General Ramey's back, General Ramey being the commander of the 8th Air Force, that the balloon explanation had been handed out to the reporters, but that was not the explanation for what crashed at Roswell.
Who said that, please?
General Thomas J. Dubose.
How do we know he said that?
We have him on videotape.
Oh. And he admits this on videotape?
Yes, he does. See, that's where this story has diverged from your normal UFO story, is that there are a large number of witnesses, and a lot of them who are in positions of power in 1947. We can demonstrate it by the records of who they were, and we have those statements on audio and videotape.
All right. Down in New Mexico, Representative Schiff there, of course, has started the GAO investigation. I guess looking at the paper trail and the money trail and trying to figure out what really happened, because, of course, if it was transported up to Ohio, to Wright Pat in Ohio, there would be record of the flight, expenditures, I'm sure, and all kinds of things and ways to track it. What's going on with that investigation?
From what we understand, that's exactly what they're doing. They're looking at this event in the context of other similar events. For example, an experimental aircraft crashes. How did the military respond to that? What did they do?
Right.
How much money was spent? And putting it in that kind of a context, looking to see if they can trace the paper trail. We have records from flight crew members, for example, their personal flight logs showing some of these flights. So we can document some of this ourselves. And so, from what we understand, the GAO investigation is going to look for those sorts of things, look to see what kind of records should have been created.
What about, for example, cargo manifests?
Well, unfortunately, we're dealing with an event that took place 47 years ago, and the records aren't as complete as we'd like them to be. For example, I was able to get the morning reports. I asked for the morning reports for the entire 509th Bomb Group. What I got was the 509th Headquarters Company. And when I went back with a FOIA request, with a more specific request outlining the specific other units, they said those records don't exist. So some of the records exist, some of them don't exist. But curiously, in 1947, the 509th kept very complete unit histories from about April of 1947 through October. So we have all of those. We have a phone book that was published by the 509th Bomb Group for all the base telephones for August of 1947.
Again, let me stop you, Kevin. The 509th Bomb Group did what? Were they responsible, allegedly, for transporting what was left of the wreck, or did they investigate down there? What did they do?
Basically, yes. They were responsible for the discovery of the wreckage. They cordoned off the area. They cleaned up the wreckage. They transported a lot of the wreckage out. The 509th Bomb Group, interestingly, is the same organization that was created to drop the atomic bombs on Japan. So we're dealing with highly trained individuals, hand-picked individuals in 1947. This is the only atomic strike force in the world at the time, so they're very specific people.
Okay. And of people in that group, what sort of eyewitness testimony has come forward?
We have eyewitnesses who were there, who were on the site, said, I was there, I saw this. We have one man, unfortunately, we have to identify him by a pseudonym at his request. So his testimony is weakened because of that. But we have others. For example, Master Sergeant Lewis Rickett, who was the NCOIC of the Counterintelligence Corps, the sergeant in charge, if you will.
He'd be good.
He came forward, corroborated some of that testimony for it. We have Major Edwin Easley, the Provost Marshal, who talked about the creatures, who talked about the site north of Roswell, who gave us good ideas of what was going on the site. So we have a wide range of individuals that can provide us with eyewitness testimony that leads us to the conclusion that what was found was extraterrestrial. Edwin Easley, as I said, told me specifically that it was extraterrestrial in origin.
Give me an example in some detail, if you can, of what you would consider to be some of the best first-hand testimony of exactly what they said they saw.
They saw a craft that was more heel-shaped than saucer-shaped.
Heel shape? I'm sorry.
Heel, like the heel of a shoe.
Okay.
They saw a craft that was 25 to 30 feet long, 15 to 20 feet wide, impacted in a slope about 40 miles northwest of Roswell. There was one body, one of the flight crew, laying outside the craft up against the cliff, one body that was outside the craft near it, and there were three bodies located inside the craft.
All aliens?
All aliens.
Presumably. Described roughly how?
4.5 to 5.5 feet tall, very slender individuals. The head slightly larger than a head would be on a human of a similar size. The eyes slightly larger. Not the black orbs we talk about from the abduction phenomenon, but eyes that are slightly larger than human eyes. Heads that are hairless but covered with a slight peach fuzz or a fuzz-like matting. The arms are very skinny. The bones are thin. They're described as bird-like. Now, the interesting thing is some of the skeptical community said, well, what you've got there are people who saw primates or rhesus monkeys garbed in flying suits in test flights, and the men at Roswell were so caught up in the hysteria of the flying disc phenomena, they didn't recognize these apes for what they were. And our answer is, if you take a look at the chimpanzee, the head is not larger, it's smaller. The eyes are not larger, they're smaller.
Right.
They have big ears. They have lots of hair. That's not what was seen at Roswell. The people were very specific in what they saw.
All right. I want you to hold on for just a moment, Kevin. We'll come right back to you.
Okay.
A little bit of business. My guest is Kevin Randle. He has co-authored the book, The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. And you're going to hear what most consider to be the best evidence this morning. Now, Kevin's listening, I know, and this just came in on the Associated Press. Astronomer Carl Sagan says that people believe in things like alien abductions because they don't know much about science. During a conference of people who debunk paranormal claims, Sagan said that scientific illiteracy is widespread. In other words, he's saying we're dummies. He pointed to studies that show up to 1/2 of U.S. adults don't know the Earth revolves around the sun once a year. He asked why newspapers have daily astrology columns, but no daily science columns. Most of the 740 people at the conference in Washington this weekend are psychologists. The annual conference, held by the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal out of Buffalo, New York. So there you go. Carl Sagan would be a star indeed to that group. And, Kevin, are you there?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I think that Carl Sagan's overstating his case. What we're conducting at Roswell, for example, is not a scientific investigation, but is more akin to a criminal investigation. We're searching for the evidence for science so that they can take a look at it. But they claim to be looking as skeptics or debunkers at the UFO phenomena or claims of the paranormal, but they're not interested in looking at the evidence. They know this can't possibly be, therefore it is not. And it doesn't matter what we present in the way of evidence. For example, we can prove what ufologists have said for years. The United States government had a secret project to investigate UFOs that was not Project Blue Book. If you go back and look at the regulations, Air Force Regulation 200-2, dated August of 1954, tells me as a former Air Force intelligence officer, if I get a UFO report from a flight crew, I don't send it to Project Blue Book. I send it to the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and they determine whether or not it goes on the Blue Book. And a lot of times, for reasons we don't know, they didn't go on to Project Blue Book. So we can prove the government had the secret project. We have documentation to prove quite a bit of what we say.
All right. Have they still got that today, Kevin? In other words, that secret parallel investigation, is that still going on today? Do you know?
Blue Book was dropped in 1969.
No, not Blue Book.
But the other investigation continues on because we've run into people who have submitted UFO reports or have them investigated by government officials after 1969. So, yes, that secret investigation continues. Part of it was disguised as Project Moondust. We can prove Project Moondust existed. When New Mexican Senator Jeff Bingaman queried the Air Force about Project Moondust, which was designed specifically to recover material of unknown origin returning from space, or that of foreign origin, and the unknown origin clearly can be UFOs. He was told no such project ever existed. Moondust never existed. When the documents were given to the Air Force, they said, we'd like to amend our last statement. We've got the Air Force lying to a United States senator about a project that clearly existed. When we queried them about it, they said that project no longer exists, but we know from other documents the name has been changed because Moondust was compromised.
What do you think what do you think they have concluded after all this time? Do you have anybody telling stories about the ongoing investigation?
We have very little information about that other than the documentation we have from Project Moondust, and Moondust clearly is looking for stuff. If Roswell took place, they would assume that it could happen again. And Moondust, because of its mandate to recover returning space debris of foreign origin or unknown origin, clearly could cover another crash of an alien spacecraft if it happened. That would be encompassed in part of Moondust's mandate. There's no doubt in our mind, and I say ours, Don Schmidt's in my mind, that what happened in 1947 was a recovery in alien spacecraft, and it set the tone for UFO research from that point onward.
All right. Is there any evidence that since Roswell there has been another crash of any substance at all, or is that the one?
This is the best documented because of the number of witnesses and the documentation available. But we have other information. For example, there is beginning to build a body of evidence for a crash near Kingman, Arizona in 1953. There's another one near Las Vegas in 1962. And what's interesting about this one is the Air Force actually broke the sighting into two parts, part of it over Utah, part of it over Nevada. So they have two separate sightings, but if you take a look at it, it's one single event. And the Air Force card from the Nellis Air Force Base said it was seen on radar, but there was no visual sighting. If you go back to the Las Vegas Sun for, I believe it's April 19th, 1962, the banner headline says, "Brilliant red explosion flares in Las Vegas sky." And there are eyewitnesses who talk about this, including the staff photographer of the newspaper at the time, who saw this thing in the sky as it detonated.
Well, Oh, as it actually
it exploded in the sky.
Exploded in the sky. Oh, okay. Well, meteorites, returning meteorites and so forth, do that sort of thing. What makes it a UFO crash?
Because meteorites are not picked up on radar, and B, if we track this thing based on the eyewitness testimony from Utah to Reno to Las Vegas, meteors don't make big looping turns over Nevada.
Oh, they definitely don't do that, right?
And see, what's interesting is they say the case from Nevada is dated using the Greenwich Mean Time, Zulu time.
Do we have any craft on the ground, bodies, evidence, physical evidence of that?
Not from that at this point.
All right,
We've
so
just
then
begun to research. There's another case from Ubatuba, Brazil in 1957 where bits of metal were picked up and analyzed by the Brazilian government, who said it was magnesium of a purity unobtainable at Earth at the time. That metal was analyzed again by Condon, who said, well, the sample we looked at wasn't that pure, therefore all the samples were not that pure, which is a conclusion that scientifically they couldn't draw.
All right, all right, we're at the bottom of the hour, Kevin. We got to pause here. So, in conclusion for this half hour, Roswell is definitely the best documented case. Yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
All right, hold on, Kevin. We'll be right back to you. This is Coast to Coast AM from the High.
You're listening to Art Bell, Somewhere in Time. Tonight featuring Coast to Coast AM from June 24th, 1994.
From the high desert we come. Hi, everybody. My guest is Kevin Randle. He's co-authored a book called The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. Do you want to know the truth? Well, I do. I think most of us do. We're involved in this subject. Since it is the best documented case of a crash, of recovery of bodies, it makes sense to follow it, doesn't it? So back now to Kevin Randle. Kevin, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Good. So here it is, the best evidence, I suppose, of actual contact. Where do we go from here with it, Kevin?
What we have to do is convince people like Carl Sagan, convince the journalistic community that this is a case that deserves investigation. We have to convince them the evidence is strong enough to do so. I think we've done it. We can prove something crashed at Roswell. The documentation is there to prove that. We can prove the military covered it up. General DuBose's statement proves that. We believe, based on the eyewitness testimony, the people we've talked to, that it was extraterrestrial. But I don't think we have to make that case. All we have to do is prove that something happened and it was covered up by the government.
I don't see it that way, Kevin. I could understand. For example, they would have an experimental craft up, and it would crash. Then it would make sense. The government certainly would cover it up. Why, so it does seem to me the burden of proof is that it was extraterrestrial in origin, not that there was a crash, because that could easily have occurred.
I think the point is there was a cover-up that took place, and it persists today. We've tried to research as carefully as possible all the alternative explanations. We looked into the Northrop Flying Wing, for example, because one researcher suggested that was what crashed there.
Right.
We found it couldn't possibly have been. We looked at the rocket research out of White Sands. Nothing there to account for it. We looked into the balloon launchings of various projects, including Project Mogul, which was this idea that if you could put an instrument package into this acoustical level in the atmosphere, like the acoustical level in the ocean, they could monitor Soviet atomic experiments. And they couldn't discover a way of doing that, and they couldn't find the acoustical level, so Project Mogul doesn't exist. We looked at the alternative explanations and could find nothing that would account for the crash in the right time frame, the types of debris that was talked about, and the bodies. When you get to the bodies, it becomes very important.
Well, then it becomes a different sort of story. I suppose on the part of the government, I simply concede to you, well, yes, there was a crash there, but it was one of ours. I mean, so then the burden of proof, really, once you acknowledge there was a crash, and I believe there was, the burden of proof is that it was of extraterrestrial origin.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, we must convince the journalistic community here is an event that deserves research, and that we can prove the crash took place and we can prove the cover-up. Why does the cover-up persist today? Why can't we get the proper answers? When they present documentation, it does not cover the events at Roswell.
Yeah, That's a good question. It, of course, is. I mean, with all the brouhaha, why let it continue if it was something that was secret then and certainly would not be now?
Yeah, that's our point. What would we have been testing in 1947 that would be persisting as a secret today? Even the early crashes of the SR-71, and some of those are still partially classified. But we can get documentation, and we can write those things off. We can realize what's going on. With Roswell, it's completely missing. For example, the Project Blue Book files. Lots of these kinds of stories early on in the UFO phenomena, part of the Project Blue Book files. There's no mention of Roswell. There's no file for Roswell in Project Blue Book. Why not? We can find some documentation that relates to it. There's an FBI document where J. Edgar Hoover, in his own handwriting, suggests something about the discs recovered, and the Army wouldn't let the FBI see it. Now, there are alternative explanations for that handwritten note, but it opens the door for us.
Well, let me ask specifically, you say from J. Edgar Hoover, specifically, what did he say? How close did he really get to suggesting they were something else, discs?
What happened was Brigadier General Shogun, who was the Assistant Chief of Staff for Air Intelligence in 1947, had asked the FBI to investigate the backgrounds of people who saw flying saucers. Mm-hmm. The FBI thought they should do that. In fact, there was a number of endorsements. This document is dated 10 July 1947, not long after the events in Roswell. Hoover, in his handwritten endorsement, says, I would do this, but before we do it, I want to see, I want complete access to discs recovered. For example, and then there's this ambiguous little statement. We don't know whether it's SWLA or what it says, but he says, in the LA case, for example, the Army grabbed it, wouldn't let anybody have it for even a cursory examination. So we've got a statement that talks about discs recovered and the fact the Army grabbed it, which fits the Roswell events exactly. But it's ambiguous enough that we can't say, well, here's proof positive in J. Edgar Hoover's own handwriting proving that there were crashed flying saucers. Mm-hmm. But it opens the door for that. General Twining in September of 1947 issued a report based on, again, information submitted by Shogun that said that the first paragraph says that the phenomenon being talked about is something real, not illusionary or fictitious, meaning flying discs. Yeah. Later on, he says, due consideration must be given to the fact that there is no exhibits in the form of crash-recovered debris. But what he's saying is, in that specific sample provided by Shogun, there was nothing that alluded to a crashed flying saucer. But that does not mean that Twining wasn't aware of the events in Roswell.
Curious, Kevin, where might these discs be today? Surely we would not have disposed of them. We would have them someplace or another.
Our best evidence is that the material originally went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Wright Field at the time.
Yes.
We have been told now that they've been moved to Nevada. Not Area 51, not Dreamland, but a special base in central Nevada. We haven't been able to corroborate that. That's just what we've been told.
Well, as you know, maybe you don't know, I'm literally almost at Dreamland. Not quite at Dreamland. It's just over the hill from me here. And we see a lot of things flying in the skies. And for a long time, there were very persistent reports, even some eyewitness testimony, of there being discs at an area called S4, which is sort of an adjacent area to Dreamland. Could it have been those?
The one thing we have to keep in mind is that area you're referring to, of course, is also an area where there's a lot of legitimate experimental aircraft being tested.
That's right.
So the sightings might be of nothing more sinister than our own experimentation. Well, there might be something else going on there as well.
That may be, Kevin, but if so, then our own experimentation, as documented with a lot of video cameras and so forth, is of circular craft that are able to do things that you would associate with flying saucers.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm just saying we have to keep in mind it is possible that it is our own experimentation, but it may not be.
Our own experimentation with our aircraft?
With our aircraft.
Well, yes,
but it may be, as has been alleged, that it's experimentation with something that was captured from the aliens, or experimentation of an alien-type craft based on the technology recovered at Roswell, among other places.
That's right.
So it's always there's those distinct possibilities, but we have to keep in the back of our minds that the secrecy may just revolve around the fact that it's our own experimentation, and we don't want that sort of thing leaking out into the general public at this time. We have to keep that in the back of our mind. But there's always this other intriguing possibility. And if we can establish that Roswell is extraterrestrial, then those sorts of speculations take on an added dimension because we've already leaped the first hurdle, which is to get the craft here from another planet. We've proven that. Now it's distinctly possible that we do, in fact, have a craft, and we are, in fact, experimenting with it.
All right. So how do we blow the lid off it? I mean, if you're convinced, you sound like a rational person to me.
Thank you.
As a result of all your investigation, are you absolutely convinced or just about convinced, or what is your confidence level that Roswell was extraterrestrial in origin?
There is no doubt in my mind that Roswell was extraterrestrial, and it's based on talking to the eyewitnesses. It's based on trying to find an alternative explanation that just does not fit all the facts. When we bring all the facts into play, there is no other explanation other than extraterrestrial. And I think we need to convince the journalistic community and the scientific community that this is an area that deserves further attention. It's not the realm of the weirdo or the nutcase, but it's something that clearly happened, and we've got the eyewitness testimony to prove it. Now we must move on to finding better documentation for it.
All right, fine. So we've established all this. The government probably knows about it, probably is covering it up, and here we sit like a person with a can of some of the fine tuna that I sell, turning it over and over without a can opener, trying to figure out how to get it open. So how do we get the can open?
Well, as I say, one of the ways we get it open is to convince the media to look into it and start pressing it. If we cannot convince the media, we'll never be able to create the pressure for Congress to act. If we can blow it off by saying, well, you know, it's just a bunch of kooks and we don't have to worry about it, or I'm too sophisticated to believe in this stuff, we're never going to get anywhere. But if we can convince people that the level of research is high enough and the documentation is good enough, then we can apply that pressure to the proper individuals in Congress. And Congressman Schiff and the GAO investigation is certainly a step in the right direction. The work being done by Senator Jeff Bingaman and other senators to find out what's going on with moon dust is a step in the right direction.
All right. What about Hazel O'Leary, who has released all this information in the administration about past atomic experiments, plutonium injections, and all the rest of the horrible stuff? They've released that. So then why not this?
That's a very good question. We think that part of the problem may be they're still concerned about a panic, and I say I don't see how that can be, because if they told us tomorrow that the flying saucers were real, they're extraterrestrial, and one crashed at Roswell, your immediate reaction might be to panic, but then you'll say, you know, this happened 47 years ago. How has it adversely affected my life? But if one lands at the Pentagon tomorrow, we're not going to have that nice cushion to fall back on.
Well, I've done a talk show now, this round of talk shows anyway, for about 9 years, Kevin, and I can tell you something. If the news got out that indeed the ETs are here, that perhaps it leads back toward the possibility that they are, in effect, our creators or manipulators, Kevin, I'm telling you, I talked to the religious folks all across this country. They would they'd fill these little aliens, if they still existed, with so much lead that they'd be nothing but a big donut hole. I'm not kidding you. There would be panic. There would be a lot of anger. And a lot of times when you talk about these topics, Kevin, there's a lot of anger from these people. So I don't discount people saying, oh, no, there would be panic and social disruption.
Oh, I agree. But I think that one of the things we have to remember is if they announced that we had aliens from 1947 on, we've got a cushion of some sort. It's not affected me adversely since 1947.
That's
Why?
True.
Does it suddenly affect me now? If they landed at the Pentagon tomorrow, we do not have that cushion, and I think the level of panic would be that much higher.
All right. Well,
geometrically.
Right. But
higher.
what about all of the years of reports of abductions? You know, if those are true, Kevin, that would seem to suggest that we are aware of what's going on, or maybe we've made a deal with the aliens or whatever it is, and they'd be very unlikely to reveal something like that.
Oh, absolutely correct, and that may be part of our problem. Or they haven't figured out the codes, if you will, of the spacecraft. They don't know how to make it work yet. They don't know how to create the metal. If we have descriptions of metal at the debris field at Roswell that when you picked it up, and you fold it up into a ball, it would unfold itself without a sign of a crease. What does that do to the body shop? The next time you have a fender bender in the car, you back up and the fender repairs itself. So there are all kinds of questions that need to be addressed about what would be the ramifications after we learn the truth. But at some point, we're going to know the truth. Something is going to happen, and it's going to be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. And yet there are people today who know that we never landed on the moon. It was all a Hollywood trick. So
Kevin, if you had the proof in your hand, I love asking this question, the irrefutable proof in your hand, would you immediately release it?
I would, yes.
You would?
Absolutely.
And suppose I came to you just before you were about to have your big news conference, and I said, Kevin, I'm from the government agency I can't even talk about. We understand what you have. We have concluded over the years that to release such information would be detrimental to the national security, and we're asking you not to release what you've got.
I say prove it. Prove it's detrimental to the national security.
Well, we can sit you down and let you read all the reports we've got from our psychologists showing that there would be social disruption.
I'm aware that the Brookings Institution, for example, in 1962 did a study. They took 15 different disciplines and asked them, theologians, anthropologists, economists, what would happen if there was a confrontation between people of Earth and an alien civilization. Not necessarily a face-to-face confrontation, but the fact we learned about it through radio astronomy. And of those disciplines, 14 of them said it would be disastrous to our civilization. But isn't that also the way our civilization grows and becomes better?
Grows and becomes better. I guess it would be growth of a sort. Kevin, hold on just a moment. We'll come right back to you. My guest is Kevin Randle, and he is co-author of The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, and directly we'll get back to him. Kevin Randle, author of The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, back on the air. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, how's it going?
Listen, before I lose track of things here, what have you got going on this weekend? Where is it? What is it?
Well, we're giving a lecture on what we've learned about Roswell, including some of the new testimony that we've developed in the last 2 or 3 weeks to corroborate some of the things that we found at the Red Lion Lloyd Center in downtown Portland, Oregon. It starts at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. And Mike Linneman is going to be there as well, talking about some of his research. And Don Schmidt, my partner from the center, is going to be there. So there's 3 of us that'll be...
oh, that's wonderful. I've interviewed Michael Linneman, and he is a great guy, and he's going to be there too. So again... Absolutely, yes. All right, again, where is it? How do people get in? What do they have to cough up?
Well, it says here they have to cough up $15, and for that you get all 3 of us talking about our research. And it's at the Red Lion Lloyd Center in downtown Portland, Oregon. And for ticket information in this area, they can call 224-8499.
All right. Wanted to get that in for sure.
Appreciate that.
I guess what I'd like to do shortly is turn it over to the audience and let them ask you some hard questions. You obviously have done a lot of research. It's a pretty good-sized book you've got here, Kevin, no question about it, and there's a lot of documentation in here. Have you had a colleague, a scientific colleague, sit down, read this book, and give you a good evaluation of it? I mean, do they come away saying, oh, my God, it really happened at Roswell, or what do people come up with?
It kind of depends on their persuasion and what they're looking for. But what we've tried to do is put together a case that's not necessarily a scientific case, but more of the kind of case you would present going into a court of law. We're in a search for the proper evidence for the scientific community.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've come up with the evidence the scientific community can take into the laboratory and analyze. But we found the kind of evidence that endorses this sort of an investigation. So that's kind of where we are. We've had colleagues with the scientific bent take a look at the information. They have suggested ways that we could have improved the work. One of the complaints was the footnotes didn't contain enough data about the how the interviews were conducted and whether or not they were on audio or videotape. And almost all the interviews we conducted are on either or, audio or videotape. So it's not just necessarily you have to take our interpretation of what somebody said to us in a private conversation.
Do you have any plans to include those interviews in an audio tape presentation or in a videotape presentation?
There are some videotape presentations out that include parts of those interviews. The Fund for UFO Research, for example, has one called the Recollections of Roswell Part 2 that they sell that has quite a bit of that kind of material in it.
All right, Kevin, I'm going to break here and turn you over to the audience when we come back. All right?
Okay, sounds good.
All right, Kevin Randle, co-author of The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, back after the news.
The trip back in time continues with Art Bell hosting Coast to Coast AM. More Somewhere in Time coming up.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Art Bell. My guest is Kevin Randle. Who is he? He's co-author of The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, the best documented case of an alien crash on Earth. And I'm going to give you a chance to talk to him here in a moment. I just got a fax in, and I guess 2020 did a pretty good piece on the new case of the flesh-eating, ate-my-face-off strep A. And you might be interested in this. The Center for Disease Control predicts 1,000 new cases of that this year, but experts are saying the cases will exceed 7,000 this year. Always been around. Nothing to worry about. I'm from the government, here to help you. For Kevin Randle, in a related, sort of a related question, did any of the personnel who came into contact with any alien crew members, alive or dead, contract any new virus or bacterial infection, and could any new diseases we have appearing today be a result of this contact? Kevin, what do you think?
We have no evidence that any of the people who came in contact with the bodies manifested any type of illness or disease that would be related directly to that contact. In fact, one man had sent me a letter and suggested that because there were no outbreaks of a new disease that swept the planet clean of humanity, it proved that the Roswell didn't happen. There are many diseases that we have that are species-specific. Reptiles can't get certain diseases that affect mammals. Mammals can't...
Yeah, that strikes me as an absolutely ridiculous statement on the face of it.
Which one?
Well, the one you just gave, that the fact that no disease spread itself quickly across the planet, wiping out mankind, proves they didn't come here. That's
I agree.
Ridiculous.
I agree that's a ridiculous statement, but that was his premise. And my response was that there are diseases that are very species-specific, and the fact that we didn't contract some alien bug does not prove that it did or did not happen. All it means is that it did not happen. We have no evidence that any of the diseases that are affecting the human race today are a result of something that happened at Roswell 47 years ago.
All right, Kevin, I've got a bank full of people who want to talk to you here. Are you ready?
I'm all set.
Okay, here we go. Wild card line. You're on the air with Kevin Randle. Good evening or morning. Where are you calling from, please? Hello there. Well, it's a strange start. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Art.
Hi, where are you, sir?
Kansas City, Missouri.
Kansas City. Yes, sir.
Yeah, a place where the barbecue's hot, but Art Bell's show is hottest.
That's kind.
Yeah. Oh, well, actually, I was just curious about something. Your guest had mentioned earlier, and I don't know if you picked up on this, but he mentioned something to the effect that most people know today that the moonshot was just a Hollywood production.
No, I didn't say that. What I said was there are people today who believe that the moonshots that are landing on the moon were nothing more than a Hollywood production. It's a very small number of people, but there are people who believe that.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. Well, anyway, I'll get to my question. Do we know where these aliens came from at all, or you know, is it basically where just the ships crashed and the government got the technology, but they don't care where they came from?
All right. Yeah, that's a good question. Do we have any idea?
I don't have any idea. I think that if the government can answer that question, they would love to have an answer. The only clue that's ever come out of the UFO phenomena, of course, is the Betty Hill star map, which is a result of her abduction back in 1961, and Marjorie Fish attempting to find which section of the galaxy it came from, suggesting they may have been from Zeta 1, Zeta 2 Reticuli. But I don't think that's a very good clue. What happened at Roswell, we meaning we civilians outside the government, have no clues about where they came from.
All right. Very good. On the wild card line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hi.
Hi, Art. Stan here in Cocoa Country.
Yes, San Diego.
We had some vibrations today before I asked my question. About between 5 and 10 after 10 in the morning, everything was calm, and all of a sudden, my windows, I have huge windows, 4 sets of huge windows, rattled and vibrated like 100 bass drums for about 3 seconds.
So the Earth moves in California again?
No, it was not an earthquake.
What was it?
Don't know. Miramar Air Force Base said, we don't know. All the news stations said, we don't know, but we know it wasn't an earthquake.
Unidentified moving vibrations.
There you go. We've had that before. Anyway, my question, it's so hard for me to understand why, and the key phrase that you used, you haven't presented them the right evidence. You said something like that, right, Kevin?
For the scientific community, the evidence they require is somewhat different than the evidence we've been searching for. We need to prove the case so we know where to look for the proper evidence, I guess.
Okay, now, so how do they explain? I mean, Roswell's been around forever. I can't believe there haven't been 10,000 scientists that aren't curious. But how do they explain the absolute evidence of the pyramids and that they could not have been built by anybody here?
All right, thank you. The pyramids. Have you looked into that at all, Kevin?
Not really, no. My undergraduate degree was in anthropology, but my area of emphasis was Mesoamerican, the Central Andes, as opposed to Egyptology.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that I have seen the theories that have been presented lately about how the pyramids were constructed in Egypt, and the theories that they're being presented seem to make some sense about how they did it. And I know that they just uncovered not too long ago the remains of the city at the base of one of the major pyramids.
That's right.
Suggest that it was not the slave labor we've been led to believe, but actually a public works project, if you will. So there's evidence that needs to be looked at and examined, and I think that we need to take a skeptical eye to all the evidence and look at it rationally and try to determine whether or not the explanations being offered make sense to us rather than reject them out of hand.
Okay, Kevin, have you looked at all at the work of Richard Hoagland with respect to Mars and the structures on Mars and the mathematical similarities to the pyramids here on Earth, and now his latest work with regard to the moon? Have you looked at all that?
I've heard him on the radio, and I've read his book because I found it fascinating. And I think that the face on Mars, for example, I mean, there is an area where it demands that we take another look at it. Unfortunately, I like to joke about the reason we don't know more about it is because the aliens blew up the Mars observer, so we wouldn't have the answers and could question it longer. But I think that his work is very interesting.
Well, it is because it would suggest that either an ancient alien civilization visited here, or in the view of some, Kevin, there was a prior civilization, or even many of them, here on Earth that may have at one time colonized Mars.
And I think that if we found the artifact on Mars to be, in fact, a manufactured artifact, that would be pretty much evidence that somebody was traveling through space at some point.
Yes, but...
And it's clearly not us because we can't do it.
Well, there are a lot of people who speculate that there have been prior civilizations, that there have been cycles here on Earth when man has come and man has gone, generally because of polar shifts and other great Earth changes that have occurred. What do you think of that theory? It's an interesting theory, and I know that I used to study what was called OOPS, out-of-place things, out-of-place artifacts.
And these were nails found in solid rock or the spark plug found in the geode.
Exactly.
That sort of thing. Things that clearly shouldn't be there but are in fact there.
Right.
And how do you explain a nail being pulled out of a block of granite, for crying out loud? If the nail wasn't dropped as the granite was forming millions of years ago, which would be suggestive of that? There's the tracks of the human and the dinosaur that they have in the bed, the riverbeds in Texas. And I've heard theories that seem plausible that the dinosaur walked through the place, the area solidified. Later on, it softened up, and then a human walked through it and left his footprint. So it looks like the footprints of a human with the footprints of a dinosaur. Or it was another type of dinosaur that had a human-looking footprint. You know, they're interesting things that I think we need to look at without an idea to, well, it can't possibly be, therefore it is not.
All right. What about the source of criticism of Carl Sagan in this AP story I read you about abductions? Have you looked at the abduction phenomenon, and if so, what kind of credibility do you think it has?
I think that there is some good credibility to the abduction phenomenon. I also think there's some very poor research that's been done. If you go back and you read some of the earlier works on abductions, you see that the technician or the hypnotherapist has asked very leading questions and has led the witness in a lot of directions. We know from our current studies about the false memory syndrome, where you can actually induce memories in people but by trying to convince them that events took place. So our level of research as researchers must increase and must improve so that those kind of criticisms can't be directed at us. But I looked at one of the abduction cases from 1973. I looked at it in 1976. And the thing that's always bothered me about this is the number of people from the same family abducted. And the oldest daughter said that she thought the abduction took place at 1 o'clock in the morning. But the mother told me that they'd filed a police report because they thought there was somebody messing with the house, some kind of an intruder, although I hesitate to use that term. And I went and found the police report. The police report had been filed at 12:40 a.m. Well, there's no way that the youngest daughter could be abducted at 1 o'clock in the morning if they were conscious enough to make a police report at 12:40. But then I discovered the youngest daughter was nearsighted, and the clock that she saw, the hands were almost the same size. So if you didn't get a look at the clock, 5 minutes after 12 looks an awful lot like 1 o'clock in the morning. And that's the kind of a detail that somebody inventing a story isn't going to make up. So something clearly happened to this family, and I don't know what it is, and it seems to fit into the abduction phenomenon. So there are some interesting cases. I don't think it's nearly as prevalent as we're led to believe, but I think there is something to the phenomenon.
Well, it winds back into what I was saying earlier, Kevin. If the abductions are real, then the implication clearly would be, if you believe in the government cover-up, that they're well aware of the abductions. So then I think, well, if that's true, there's no chance at all that they're ever going to tell us the truth or that we're going to be able to dig it out, because they've made a deal, and the chances of their revealing that are almost zero, slim and none.
Given that scenario, I think you're probably right. But the decision can be taken out of their hands. And, of course, if one lands at the United Nations, then the decision is taken out of their hands. But if there is no deal between our government and the aliens to allow the abductions to take place, and if the abduction phenomenon isn't as widespread as it seems to be, then there may be no deal, and we may be able to dig something out.
That's true. Kevin, hold on just a moment. Back now to my guest, Kevin Randle, and your questions. Kevin, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right. Let us go to the telephone, Kevin. On the first-time caller line, you're on the air. Good morning.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, sir.
I like to be on the air.
You are on the air.
Oh.
I guess he's not.
Turn down your radio.
Yeah, that's right. And turn on your mind. On the wild card line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hello.
Another good show. This is Dan from the University District in Seattle.
Yes, Dan.
I have One question I had was, now, did they recover, was one of the aliens alive, and did they have him, kept him alive for a number of years? Is that correct?
We have heard that information. We have no first-hand corroboration for it. There are a number of second-hand witnesses. Frankie Rowe, for example, whose father was a firefighter in Roswell in 1947, said that her father said one was alive and that they put it, that they drove it out of off the impact site into the base hospital. But I have to stress, we have no first-hand corroboration for that. We've also heard that one survived a number of years after this event and died in '52, I think. Again, we have no first-hand corroboration for that at this time.
Yeah, I'd heard that also. And in light of that, it's possibly conceivable that they did find out where they're from, but they're just not, nobody knows for sure, huh?
There may be, even if the entire crew was killed, there may have been clues in the ship that would have given us a clue about where they came from, some kind of star maps or something like that. We don't have access to that information, but the government, the people who are responsible for the retrieval, may have that information. We just don't.
Okay, well, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for the call, and have a good morning. On the first-time caller line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Hi. Where are you, please?
I'm calling from Montreal, Quebec.
Montreal, Quebec. All right, great.
In Canada, yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to know, many years ago when I was a young lad, there were two publications running simultaneously. One was Reader's Digest, which is still running. The other one was a small book, the same format, called Coronet.
All right.
And somewhere around 52, 53, 54, they ran a small color pictorial in the back of Coronet, which was a common feature with the magazine at that time, and did a whole feature on Roswell. Now, I don't know whether your guest is aware of that or not, or maybe he could find some archives to go back to that.
I live in Iowa myself, and the University of Iowa has all those magazines there. We'd heard the story that one of the issues had been dealt with the crash and had disappeared completely. So we went back through them in the 40s and looked to see if there was anything missing, and there wasn't. I hadn't heard that there was something like that from Coronet in the early 50s, you say?
Well, I hope so. I remember seeing the issue, and it fascinated me. And the issue was around my family home for many years. As a matter of fact, a few years ago when I was back home, I looked for it, but it had gone. Probably been thrown out, but I know when I was a young lad, somewhere between, let's say 10, 12 years of age, which would have, I guess, put it, 46, 56, maybe 56, 58.
Later 50s then.
Yeah.
That magazine exists. I know they have it at the University of Iowa libraries, and I think one of the first things I'm going to do next week is go down there and take a look at the issues and see if I can find that. I hadn't heard that, and I would think that if something like that had happened prior to this point, somebody would have mentioned it and would have come forward.
All right, but it certainly is.
But it deserves further research.
Exactly.
I swear, I am telling the truth.
All right.
It did exist.
Well, I'm sure, caller, I'm sure he will follow up on it. So we'll get.
Absolutely.
All right, good.
Could I just find out how I could get a hold of your book?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. Thank you. From Montreal. How can he get your book?
He can call M. Evans and Company in New York at area code 212-688-2810, and they can provide him with the information to order it.
All right. Repeat the number.
It's area code 212-688-2810. And it should be available in the bookstores, both in the United States and Canada, so you should be able to order it through the bookstore as well.
All right, very good. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Good morning.
Hello, this is Gary from Kennewick.
From Kennewick, Washington, yes.
Anyway, like the guy was talking before, I said where it was coming from. I heard several guys talking before, the polar shifts, that these guys may be from inside Earth.
Well, or from Earth at some prior civilization, yes.
Or they could be from the Earth in the future, coming back through time travel to take a look at us as well.
Yeah, there's another one.
Yeah, and that would seem to go more along with the evolution, humans evolving up into a different-looking form.
Well, I suppose that could be. All right, thank you. We're very short on time here on the first-time caller line. You're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hi.
Hi. How's it going? I'm calling from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I just had a few questions for your guest.
Okay.
Well, I was kind of wondering, I've seen a lot of weird things around here, too, in New Mexico and stuff like that, but, and they're talking about all this stuff and where they're coming from. You never know. They could be, from galaxies far away. You know what I mean? What does he think on that?
That, I suppose, is what he thinks.
Well, yeah, clearly I believe they're extraterrestrial. They come from, not from inside our solar system, because there doesn't seem a planet that would be capable of supporting life, so they come from another solar system inside our galaxy, I would assume.
All right, wildcard line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle, and not a lot of time. Hi, where are you calling from?
Phoenix, Arizona.
Phoenix, okay. Turn your radio off. That's good. All right, you're on the air with Kevin. What is it? Do you have a question? All right, are you going to turn the radio off?
It's off.
Thank you. Do you have
Well, I think this is marvelous, and I started calling so I could get information on how to get his book. I do have a story about a flying saucer, which are probably millions of them. But my folks and I were in 1952 going from Kingman, Arizona to Las Vegas, and...
All right, listen, we're not going to have time for that. We're at the bottom of the hour. I'll give you an option. Do you want to hold on?
Oh, no, that's okay. I know. Well, I'm glad that this is all coming out.
All right, well, keep listening then. We'll tell you how to get hold of the book. Kevin, we'll be right back with you. This is Coast to Coast AM.
This is Premier Networks. That was Art Bell hosting Coast to Coast AM on this Somewhere in Time.
Kevin Randle is my guest. He is co-author, along with Donald Schmidt, of The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, New Mexico. I added the state there. I assume you know it's Roswell. And that's what we're talking about, the possibility that a UFO crashed, alien beings and ships were recovered, and what that means for us. And, of course, the moment this is actually proven, beyond any shadow of a doubt, it will be the biggest story of all of human history. Kevin, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, good. A lot of calls, so why don't we go back to the phones?
Okay.
All right. Wildcard line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hello.
Hi, Art. This is Dino in SeaTac.
SeaTac, Washington, yes.
That's right. Kevin, I wanted to ask you, do you have any idea where the remains of the crash would be kept now at this present time? And also, I would assume that if the government had recovered bodies, that they would also have them still. Do you have any idea where that would be?
The best information we have is part of the debris went to the Los Alamos National Laboratory. The craft itself and the majority of the debris and the bodies eventually made it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Wright Field at the time. One of the bodies supposedly went to Lowry Army Airfield in 1947 because that's where the Army had its mortuary service. The information we have now is the craft and the bodies are located in a special facility in the middle of Nevada, which is not part of the Groom Lake, Dreamland Area 51 complex. But that information about it being in Nevada is pretty speculative. We can trace the stuff in 47 to the bases in Ohio, and we've got evidence it was there for a period after that. And then we have other things that tell us where it may have gone or where it may be still. But, of course, you don't dispose of unique samples, so they're somewhere.
So the best guess is it's here in Nevada. Nearly anything anybody can't explain seems to end up in Nevada.
Right.
All right, caller, thank you very much. We are the repository, in some cases the suppository for a great deal of the nation's ills. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hello.
Hi, good morning, Art. Glad to talk to you. Calling from Portland, Oregon.
Portland, yes, sir.
I have a question or a comment. First of all, great show. I listen to you every evening.
Thank you.
On this whole thing about abduction, what I don't understand, and I kind of fail to believe, is that if the government had a deal made with these aliens to kind of look the other way for an abduction, why would they go through abducting and keeping it as a hot topic wouldn't they be able to find volunteers to have them study or learn?
Well, would you volunteer?
Oh, in a second.
Would you really?
Oh, yes, I would.
After what I've heard about abductions, I certainly wouldn't.
Oh, I would.
I mean, we're talking tables here, medical procedures, long needles, and you'd volunteer?
Oh, sure. It wouldn't be any different from some of the physicals that we go through here today.
Well,
And I think that the exchange of knowledge, it would seem that if they had volunteers, there would be less reports of abductions, and then you got the movies, you've got the reports. It keeps the whole issue of aliens in the news. You'd want to keep it secret, I would think. What would your...
All right. What do you think, Kevin?
Well, the problem is we're forced to speculate what an alien mind would be thinking, and we just don't have a basis for that kind of a speculation. And I'm not sure that there is any kind of agreement between our government and the aliens to allow the abductions to go on. It may be something they've just decided to do, but I don't think it's nearly as widespread as we're being led to believe. I think it's a much more limited phenomenon than is being reported.
All right. On the wild card line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hi.
Okay, this is Roy. I'm in Vancouver.
Yes.
Yeah, first-time caller, but I haven't been able to get through. Just wanted to let Kevin know that I was about 4 years old when it happened down there in Roswell, and I remember seeing the flash which scared me to dickens. And then
you mean you were in Roswell and actually saw it?
No, I was actually in Phoenix.
You were in Phoenix?
See that flash from Phoenix? Oh yes, sir.
Oh, no kidding.
No kidding. And like I say, it scared me to death. And later in life, when I figured out what it was, and then I've become a believer, but I'm not kidding you one bit.
All right. Well, I thank you. That worries me a little bit, Kevin. Why would anybody become a believer based on the fact that they saw a flash in the sky and it coincides with the rest at Roswell? Without seeing what happened at Roswell, to become a believer on the basis of a flash?
Well, my question would be, how does he relate it to the crash at Roswell? If he was 4 or 5 years old, how does he know it was related to that? The best evidence we had is that there was no flash. There was a streak of light that was seen, but the people who saw it were all in the Roswell area, and it was wasn't very high in the atmosphere when it happened. Otherwise, we would have had reports like that from all over the Southwest, and we could write that off as some kind of a meteoric phenomenon or an astronomical phenomenon. So the fact he's in Phoenix, and I just don't see how that would relate to Roswell at all.
Well, I'm worried that he would make that leap of faith, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, on the wild card line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hi.
Yes, I'm calling you from Iowa City, Iowa.
Iowa City, Iowa. Okay.
And it's a dumb question, but how come we can get pictures of aliens with Clinton and Limbaugh on supermarket tabloids, but I can never find one with my camera?
All
right. Thank you. I don't know what to do with that.
Well, it's because they're making up the pictures of the aliens with Clinton and Rush Limbaugh and the fool. We're trying to find real evidence. There's the difference.
There is, however, a good question buried in that humor, and it is, Kevin, with all of the video recorders and all of the cameras and all of the UFOs, it seems like we ought to have better photographic evidence than we do, or do we have good evidence?
We have some very good photographic evidence. There was a picture taken in McMinnville, Oregon, for example, in 1950 that's very good, or the Rex Heflin pictures from California in 1966. There was some good video footage just taken coincidentally in Roswell in, I think it was late March of this year, that they've shown on television a number of times that is very provocative. But I think the difference is, when we're talking about a UFO, it's very close to the ground. It's not seen over a wide area, so that the opportunities to film it or photograph it are somewhat limited. And I know of cases where people are just in awe of what they're seeing with a camera hanging around their necks, and they never think to use them.
I'm
afraid it's a combination of all of that.
Yeah, that really is true. I've had one UFO sighting, Kevin. I had no camera. People called me up later and said, well, how come you didn't have a camera? Well, because I don't carry a camera around as a normal part of my life. And even if I'd had one, the chances of getting it out in the dark situation I was in, getting it focused, and getting anything at all usable would be slim and none.
Yeah, I think people also overlook that if you're trying to photograph an object that is fairly small in the sky that you can make out with your eye, but when you try to photograph it, you lose an awful lot of detail. There's a lot of variables involved. There have been some very good photographic evidence, but even if we had outstanding photographs taken tomorrow, that's not going to prove it, because with the technology available today, you can fake things so many different ways, and it's impossible to detect.
It's absolutely true, and so photographic evidence, or the value of it, is diminishing as we begin to deal with each pixel.
Yeah, right.
All right. Is there anything, Kevin, do you think, that is going to come along, either your book or follow-up to your book, or more evidence that at any point is going to blow this thing wide open?
There are hints of documentation that we might be able to get our hands on. And when I say we, I mean we as a community, as opposed to Don and me specifically, that may provide us with a way of breaking the thing wide open. There may be some eyewitness testimony that if the specific people will come forward, and there is the talk of one or two major generals who are involved in it. I think if you get someone of that stature to come forward, say, yes, I was directly involved, and this is what I saw, that will go a long way to adding to our credibility.
The smoking saucer, so to speak.
Absolutely.
All right, Kevin, hold on just a moment. We'll be right back. Back now to Kevin Randle and your calls. Kevin, are you there?
I certainly am.
All right, good. On the wild card line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hello.
Good morning, Art. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning.
Kevin, I have a question about the movie that I saw quite a few years ago called, it was either Hangar 18 or Hangar 19.
Hangar 18.
Oh, yes.
Hangar 18. That was a fascinating movie, and wasn't that supposed to involve Roswell?
It was. My understanding is when they started to do the movie, they originally had an idea to do a documentary in the same vein as the Search for Noah's Ark. But they couldn't find the people who would go on the record for them, so then they decided to write a movie and made it up from that point. So I guess you could say it's very, very loosely based on the Roswell crash, but it's basically a work of fiction.
Well, okay, so because they actually showed it going down somewhere in Arizona.
And I think it was a result of a crash with, it collided with a space shuttle or a rocket.
Space shuttle, yes. And the astronauts were involved trying to track it down when they landed.
But it's all fiction.
No, okay. Yeah, it's a very interesting program you're on, and I hope we can blow the lid off it. They did have an Encounters program on, and also X-Files followed up and mentioned it at Roswell tonight.
Oh, no kidding.
It was very interesting. I recorded both of them.
There's so much going on now, and I've missed that one. Doggone it. All right, thank you very much, caller. Kevin, you're doing a thing up in Portland this weekend. And again, before I lose track of time, please tell them where it is, how they can come see you in Portland.
Well, it's being held at the Red Lion Lloyd Center in Portland, Oregon on Sunday at 2 p.m. They can just show up there with their cash in hand and get in. But for ticket information, they can also call 224-8499. And that involves me, Don Schmidt, and Michael Linneman.
Michael Linneman. Michael is really something. He's a wonderful speaker, and you are too, so I guess this is going to be a pretty good affair.
Well, thank you. And by the way, I think Michael was on the Encounters program tonight as well.
Oh, and I'm... doggone it, there's just too much out there. All right, on the toll-free line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hi.
Good morning, Art.
Good morning.
This is Dennis calling from Portland.
Yes, Dennis.
Fantastic show.
Thank you.
Credible people with credible information in this field are few and far between, and this is the one I've been waiting for because Kevin Randle is one of the top people in that category.
Right.
Thank you. Your $5 is in the mail, by the way.
I was wondering if you could maybe comment a little bit for me on the government line that this is a popped weather balloon, and if so, why did they threaten people with death over keeping this quiet?
Oh, yes. Purportedly or allegedly, Kevin, there were threats made. Can you document that?
We've talked to a number of people. One of them is Frankie Rowe, who is a 12-year-old girl, was visited by 4 military people, and she was told that if she talked about this, the family would end up at Orchard Park, which was a prisoner of war camp, and she'd be taken out in the desert, and she wouldn't come back.
Oh, my.
Now, you could assume that maybe the 12-year-old misunderstood what she was being told by the military. She overreacted to it. We've had it corroborated by other family members, but there are other civilians. Glenn Dennis, the Roswell mortician, was told he'd be picking his bones out of the sand. Sheriff Wilcox was told that if he talked about it, his family would be killed. One of the deputies that we found still alive said he wouldn't talk to us because he didn't want to get shot. So we can document through the testimony of the people involved that they clearly were threatened. And it's absolutely correct. Why, if it's just a weather balloon, or even if it's a secret project, why are they threatening the people with those kinds of dire consequences when other secrets have not been guarded with that kind of savagery?
Well, if all of that is true and they were threatening to shoot people for looking into it, what makes you think you're not going to attract some lead?
I think that at this point their best move is just to leave us alone, because if they start trying to stop our talking about this or suppress the information, they're giving us a tacit admission that we're right. But by leaving us alone, it's such an incredible secret, people have a tendency not to believe it.
It's true. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hi.
Hi.
Yes, sir. You're on the air. Turn your radio off and tell us where you're calling from.
Portland, Oregon.
Turn your radio off.
Okay.
That's good. Go ahead now.
Hey, I read a story when I was a young man that it said that at the end of the World War II, that OSA or the Secret Service, they went into Germany and the Russians and the Americans and everything, and they split the scientists and everything, and they had an identical plane prior to 1947 that was identified, and they said they had several prototypes, the Nazi Germany.
You're talking about the Horton Brothers designs.
I'm not sure about that.
They had a number of flying wings designs. They also had what was called the Comet, which is sort of a tailless aircraft, as they called it. A lot of the German scientists ended up at White Sands or Alamogordo through Operation Paperclip at the end of World War II.
Operation Paperclip. All right. Wildcard line 2, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hi.
Good morning, Art. This is Rick, a Verdolius cab driver out of Portland, and I wanted to ask your guest if he had a take on the incident that Richard Hoagland brought up, referring to a firefight in the sky up against something over the skies of Los Angeles in 1942.
The only thing I know is what the conventional wisdom is, that it was supposedly written off as war nerves and hysteria, and there was nothing really being shot at by the people. They thought there was something there. That's the only thing I know about it. I haven't heard that Richard Hoagland has any evidence or any theories that go beyond that.
Yeah, but, when you have mass sightings and you write it off as war jitters, that's like talking about swamp gas.
Oh, absolutely correct. And I haven't really looked into that. I'm saying that's all I know about it, is what I've been told.
All right. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hi.
Hi. I'm calling from San Diego.
Yes, ma'am.
And I had occasion about a week ago to see some incredible videos. I guess they're kind of being circulated underground. They had to do with the sightings that were massive sightings in Mexico at the time of the solar eclipse in the early 90s. And, of course, people had their video cameras, and they had their 35 millimeters because they were taking pictures of the eclipse. And there are tremendous numbers of videos from Mexico City, Puebla,
yes,
that went across the whole part of the continent that followed the solar eclipse.
As a matter of fact, I've heard the same rumors, thank you, ma'am, that there are a lot of pictures that have come from Mexico. Do you know anything about that, Kevin?
I've heard the same thing, and that's about, I heard that there were some massive sightings in the Mexico City area, and there was some good videotape taken, and that's really about all I know about it.
All right. It seems to me we need one central clearinghouse for all this stuff. On the wild card line, you're on the air with Kevin Randle. Hi.
How you doing, Mr. Bell? This is Woodinville, Washington.
Yes, hi.
How you doing? I got a little story to relate, if I may.
It's going to have to be a little one.
Okay. 4 boys. They were 10 years old, 1962. We were camping out. We were all watching the stars, counting shooting stars, and a ball of fire shot across right over the top of us, going horizontal. We thought it was, really crazy. But over the years, I've decided that it wasn't a flying saucer, but it was something that was statically controlled. It made a noise like like a razor or something. It made noise and it left a little trail. And and over the years, I've read things about in Southern California, all sorts of those things were spotted.
All right, thank you. Would anything go horizontal, Kevin? Anything that's re-entering, particularly at what appears to be a low altitude?
I think even meteors can appear to travel almost horizontally.
But not at a low altitude, though.
No, that would be at a much higher altitude, and I believe the dynamics of the re-entry is such that at low altitude you wouldn't have anything appear to go horizontally unless it's controlled in some fashion.
All right. Well, listen,
might have been.
We are running now very short on time, and I want to wish you luck this weekend. We'll do it one more time. You are going to be where and when?
Okay, it's the Red Lion Lloyd Center in Portland, Oregon. It's for ticket information, they call 224-8499. It's Don Schmidt, it's Michael Lindemann, and it's me talking about various aspects of the UFO phenomena. It begins at 2 o'clock.
Excellent. And your book that is, and Donald Schmidt's book, how do they get hold of this book?
The bookstore should have it. If they don't have it in the bookstore, they can order it from M. Evans Publishers.
Okay, Kevin, you have been a grand guest. And
Thank you.
What I would like to do is get hold of you or have you get hold of me and book you in on Dreamland, our other program.
Oh, delighted to do so. Once I get back home, I'll give you a call next week.
I'll look forward to it, Kevin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, that's Kevin Randle, co-author of The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. What we're going to do now is pause at the top of the hour, do a little bit of news, come back, and open the... Well, we'll do a normal open, and there's an awful lot of news to talk about. Things are popping all over the place, so we're about to get into it. Brace yourself. A Friday night, Saturday morning. From the high desert to the nation, this is Coast to Coast AM.
The trip back in time continues with Art Bell hosting Coast to Coast AM. More Somewhere in Time coming up.